Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. It's so great to see so many folks tuning in for this important and informative presentation from Susan. My name is Aaron Leffland. I'm the Executive Director of the New Canaan Land Trust. And for those unfamiliar with the Land Trust, we work to engage the New Canaan community in the protection and stewardship of open space. And thanks to supporters like you, we're able to manage close to 400 acres, maintain 6 miles of trails, restore diverse habitats, and protect New Canaan's scenic beauty. Spring is at our doorstep, and at the Land Trust, that means things are waking up across our network of 400 acres. Earlier today, I was at our Still Pond Preserve listening to spring peepers chirp and the songbirds migrating through and pollinators buzzing to collect the first pollen of the year. Tonight, Susan's presentation will give us an overview of the many different types of pollinators in New Canaan, but just as importantly, we'll talk about what they need to survive. It's our hope that you'll come away with a new appreciation for pollinators and the ways you can help them thrive on your property. Before we get started, I'd like to extend a thank you to all of the New Canaan Pollinator Pathway partners for co-hosting this event. And I'd also like to make a plug for our next big Pollinator Pathway event, which is going to be our Earth Day extravaganza on April 24th. The day will start with a lecture from Karen Bussolini entitled Designing with Plenty for Pollinators, so a perfect part 2 to this presentation. And then the event will transition into a family-friendly series of exhibits and activities from all of our different Pollinator Pathway partners. And that'll include everything from guided walks to animal shows to scavenger hunts and more. I'll share the link to that event page in the chat window once I turn it over. But without further ado, I do want to introduce tonight's speaker, Susan Bergen. Susan grew up in New Canaan and graduated from New Canaan High School. After living in New Jersey and Northern California for many years, she and her family moved back to New Canaan in 1998. She's an avid gardener, nature enthusiast, and community volunteer. She's served on the boards of the Nature Center, the Garden Club, and Beautification League, and currently serves on the board of the New Canaan Land Trust. There, she's our stewardship chair, and she's been instrumental in the development and care of the Land Trust's Silvermine Fowler Pollinator Meadow. Susan's also a member of the Town of New Canaan Sustainability Team. Susan is a keen observer of nature and particularly interested in the relationships between plants and animals, particularly pollinators. She goes out every day to observe and photograph what is going on at eye level in our native habitats and shares much of that on her daily Instagram posts, which are spectacular and I encourage you to check out. So please join me in welcoming Susan.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm very excited to be here. I think there are almost 185 people signed in tonight, so it's really quite amazing. I want to thank all of you for coming. I also want to thank the Pollinator Pathway, which Aaron just did. The New Canaan Pollinator Pathway has 9 member organizations, and I just want to give a shout out to them. It's the Town of New Canaan with their wonderful parks. It's the New Canaan Library, the New Canaan Land Trust, the Nature Center, the Garden Club, the Beautification League, Planet New Canaan, the Glass House, and Grace Farms. So all those organizations got together about 4 years ago and joined the New Canaan Pollinator Pathway. But we are one of many pollinator pathways throughout this region. All the other towns around us have them. And we also work with the Norwalk River Watershed Association, which is more regional, as well as the Hudson to Housatonic Conservation Partnership. So it's much bigger than just our own little town. Actually, the Pollinator Pathway, I believe, started in around 2007. It was in grassroots urban movement in Seattle, and it has grown, and it's now a worldwide phenomenon. There are people all over the world who are creating pollinator pathways and promoting conservation without borders, which is basically what pollinator pathways are. No borders. We're just letting them come and go wherever they want. So I'm going to share with you photographs that I have taken on my own property, also on the Land Trust property, and in public places in New Canaan, including Waveney and Irwin Parks, the Waveney Walled Garden, Lee Garden, and the Nature Center. And I've taken about 95% of these photos in New Canaan as a way of illustrating that all of us live in a habitat. We're surrounded by habitat, and I wanted to just illustrate that this is what is here if you go out and look and find it. And I just want to clarify, I'm not an entomologist and I don't have a background in science. I'm an English history major and a writer. And excuse me, I've always had an interest in nature. And I became particularly interested in pollinators about 8 years ago. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to attend the Garden Club of America's National Conservation Conference, which they have every February. And I heard one of the key speakers was Brian Walsh, who was at the time the editor of Time Magazine Science section. And he had recently published a cover story called The Plight of the Honeybee. And he talked about how important honeybees were for our agriculture, but he also talked about all the problems that honeybees have, including the colony collapse disorder and overuse of pesticides, and also habitat degradation. So I became very interested and I started observing pollinators in my yard and around town. And I very quickly learned that the honeybee is sort of the proverbial iceberg in insect pollination. The bigger picture is obviously that the plant world and the animal world have co-evolved over millennia, and they have formed very diverse co-relationships. So in putting it in a nutshell, really, if pollinators disappeared from the earth, life as we know it would be very different. So I don't know how to get rid of setup there, but anyway. Why are pollinators important? Who are our pollinators in Connecticut? And how do we create pollinator-friendly habitats? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, first of all, 80% of flowering plants worldwide depend on animals for pollination. And by animals, I mean the animal kingdom, primarily insects. So 80% of plants worldwide, and about 75% of flowering plants that we humans depend on for food, beverage, fiber, and medicine depend on the animal kingdom for pollination. So if you think of food, it's things like almonds. California grows almost 100% or 90% of the almonds worldwide, and they're 100% dependent on bees for pollination. But also fruit trees and berries, squashes, pumpkins, and tomatoes, potatoes. There's all different kinds of foods that are dependent on pollination, some on animals and some more than others. With beverage, it would be things like tea, coffee, citrus, cacao, from which we get chocolate, hot chocolate. Fiber would be cotton, hemp, sisal, natural rubber. Medicines, about 30% of pharmaceuticals are plant-based. If you think about aspirin, which comes originally from willow, digitalis has heart medication. Cinchona is where we get quinine as a preventative for malaria. So it's very widespread as to the importance of pollinators, but it's not just for humans. As I said before, it's the whole food web system on the terrestrial part of Earth. So we're all very dependent on pollinators. So basically, and I'm just going to talk in lay terms because I'm not a scientist. I'm just going to say a little bit about pollination. If flowers aren't pollinated, the plants won't set fertile seeds and they can't reproduce. So we all know plants have male and female parts, just like animals, and you have to get the male and female parts together in order to reproduce. And some flowers have male and female parts in the same flower. Sometimes they're in different flowers on the same plant, and sometimes they're on completely different plants, like hollies, winterberry holly, sassafras. There's all male plants and all female plants. You have to plant them somewhat near each other in order for them to cross-pollinate. So basically, pollination is getting the male parts together with the female parts. And flowers produce pollen, which is essentially protein. It's where the sperm is. And they also produce nectar, some of them. And nectar is sugar or energy. And nectar is really sort of a byproduct to attract additional insects who might not be coming for pollen, like butterflies and flower flies come to flowers for nectar, not for pollen. So flowers have figured out an added bonus to attract insects to come and visit them and pollinate their flowers. So in Connecticut, we have 6 major groups of pollinators. This is the Hannon Eberstadt Field at the Land Trust. It's on the corner of 123 and Canoe Hill. This is the meadow in summer. It's full of blooming perennial flowers, and in it you can find all 6 groups of our pollinators. Usually, I think what people first think about is probably bees as the #1 pollinator. And then secondly, they may think of butterflies, because who doesn't like butterflies? They're always fascinating to watch. When they're in the garden, they really get your attention. And then after butterflies, you might think of moths because they are butterfly-like. But then the other ones, there's 6 of them. So who knows about wasps? I mean, most people, I guarantee, are not fond of wasps, but they are actually excellent pollinators. And number 5, beetles. Who knew that beetles are pollinators? Not all of them, but some. And finally, we have flower flies. If you look at this picture, you would say that's a bee. But if you look more closely, you realize that it's not a bee. It's a flower fly, also called a hoverfly. And I'll go into that later. So we have our 6 pollinator groups: bees, butterflies, moths, wasps, beetles, flower flies. We also have the ruby-throated hummingbird. It's not really a really important pollinator, in our neck of the woods. In other climates, in deserts or rainforest or tropical climates, there are other hummingbirds that are really important for pollinating. There's also parrots, other birds, as well as small mammals and fruit bats. But the bats in our neck of the woods are insectivores and they're not pollinators. So we basically have these 6 groups of insects. And before I start, I also wanted to say that I am concentrating on, I'm concentrating on our native insects. So before I start, I just want to say a word about honeybees. There are 4 species of honeybees in the world: Italian, African, Russian, and Asian, sometimes called Chinese. Honeybees are not native to the Americas. They were brought here by European colonists in the 1600s. Our honeybees are actually Italian in origin. Most honeybees are domesticated and their hives are tended by humans. And there are honeybees in the wild, but if they are escapees from tended hives. So as I said, there's 4 species of honeybees. There are 4,000 species of native bees in North America. And here's just a list of some of them. Tell you the truth, I really can't tell most of them apart. I can tell a honeybee and a bumblebee and some others, but there's just so many kinds and they never stay still, and you really need to pay attention to looking at them. But in general, bees are vegetarians and they collect pollen to feed their young. There are specialty bees like resin bees. They also collect resins and oils from certain plants, and they line their nests with those. It's thought that that may prevent certain mites from coming in. But in general, they're vegetarians and they come for pollen. And bees fall in 2 categories. There's solitary nesting bees and there are social bees, our native bees. And majority of our native bees are solitary nesters. So they don't build hives, they don't make honey, they don't defend their nest, they're not going to sting you. They don't have a social hierarchy, and there's no queens. Every female makes her own nest, and lays her own eggs and provisions those eggs with, so the larva will have food to grow on. So where will they nest? So they might nest under, under a log, on the side of a tree, in a wood pile, under rocks and wood mulch, on the side of your house. Example of solitary nesting bees are mason bees. I had mason bee house for many years. If you see here, there's one there and there's one there. They are solitary nesters. Each female will choose one of these tubes here, and she'll lay 8 or 9 eggs. She will bring pollen perennials in and pack them in. So when the eggs hatch, they have food. And then she'll seal the tube like this with mud, and she'll go on her merry way. And these eggs will stay in these tubes for a year. So most of the mason bee life is spent in a tube or in the side of a plant under bark in a tree. And they spend almost their entire life developing from an egg to a larva, and then they pupate and become an adult. So it takes them a whole year to go through their whole life cycle. And then once they emerge in April, they only live about 6 weeks as adults, and then they die, and the eggs are secure to come back the next year. So it's not a very interesting life, really, for the adults or the larva, and they spend all their time just sitting there. So then we have bumblebees. They are social bees. They live in hives. They have a social hierarchy. There is a queen. The queen lays all the eggs. The worker bees do all the work. The drone's only job is to fertilize the queen, which doesn't happen very often. And they do produce a small amount of honey, but I'm told it's very watery, and it's not something that we can use as a commodity, because if you want to harvest it, you need to destroy the nest. They generally will nest underground. And the other interesting thing is that, unlike with honeybees, where several of the bees in the hive will overwinter, with bumblebees, only the pregnant queen survives the winter. All the other bees in the hive die at the end of the year. So the pregnant bee queen will hibernate underground. She will spend the winter there, emerge early in the spring, and lay eggs and start her new hive. Okay, wasps. And I can guarantee that probably if any of you have been stung by a bee, it's probably been by a wasp, and most likely a yellowjacket, which is what this is. I had the guy who delivers my oil, was talking to him a few years ago, and we were standing out in front of my house, and he was pumping gas into my oil tank, and a wasp flew out from behind the cedar shakes, and he said, "Oh my God, I hate wasps. What are they good for?" Well, I didn't think about it. I didn't really have a good answer, but I knew that they had their place. Everything has its niche, right? So, I did some research, and so here's what they do. They have they form 2 important roles for us. For one thing, they are predators of other insects. So we all know that we need to have predators to keep other populations in balance. So wasps collect insects to feed to their young. They don't raise their young on pollen. They raise their young on insects. And the other interesting thing is that the adults are excellent pollinators. Now, this one is actually a cicada killer, a very large wasp, about 2 inches long. I saw it at the entrance to New Canaan Library last summer. There were several of them nesting in the ground near their pocket garden. And this one it's actually kind of pretty, I think. But anyway, the female was feeding the larva underground, but also coming to get some nectar from this hydrangea. Okay, so there's 4,000 kinds of bees. There's 4,000 species of native wasps in the US. Again, a list of just some of them. I cannot tell a lot of them apart, but they are, well, here, okay. So we also have wasps. They have a very similar lifestyle to bees in that there are solitary nesting wasps and there are social wasps. So this is a mason wasp on a sedum, very similar to a mason bee. The female lays eggs, makes her own nest, lays the eggs. She will select cracks, holes in woods, the side of your house, between bricks, wherever. She'll lay her eggs. She will provision the eggs with paralyzed caterpillars, spiders, beetle larvae, and then she'll seal the nest with mud, larvae. She'll seal the larvae in with mud, and then she'll go on her merry way. And adult mason wasps feed on flower nectar. So wasps have stingers, particularly because they sting their prey that they're going to bring in to serve their larvae. And bees have stingers, but they rarely use them because when bees sting, they usually die. Wasps are able to sting multiple times because it's part of their lifestyle. So that's a mason wasp. Most wasps are actually social. This is Yellowjacket. They live in colonies underground. They tend to be very aggressive, protecting their nest. As I said, if you've been stung by a bee, it's probably a Yellowjacket. They feed insects to their developing larvae. So they go out and they sting whatever they want, and they bring it back and they feed it to the larva. And at some point later in the summer, they kind of switch their diet because they're done raising their young. So they switch their diet and they become excellent pollinators. They especially love fall flowers, goldenrod, asters, Joe Pye weed, things like that. And like the bumblebees, only the pregnant queen will survive the winter. So all those bees, social wasps, die at the end of the season. So if you see a paper wasp nest up in a tree in January, you can be pretty sure it's empty because they've all died and the queen has gone and hibernated underground. Okay, so butterflies. There's about 725 species of native butterflies in North America. Butterflies and moths have life cycles that are very closely intertwined with native plants. Adults can forage on any number of flowers, but their caterpillars can only digest specific host plants. And it's different for each species of butterfly. In general, if female butterfly can't find the host plant in her habitat, she can't lay her eggs, or she can lay her eggs, but they won't survive. The monarchs are a good example of this. They have co-evolved with plants of the Asclepia family, which includes milkweeds and butterfly weeds. So again, the adults can go and get nectar at many different plants, but the caterpillars cannot digest anything else but milkweed. So they have to find those in order to lay their eggs. Now, all butterflies have their own needs. I just have these two samples. This one is a spicebush swallowtail, and this is a black swallowtail. They're slightly different. The spicebush swallowtail has spicebush. This is spicebush here, and sassafras. Those are two of their host plants. And the black swallowtail has plants in the carrot family. That includes parsley, dill, fennel, Queen Anne's lace, a native golden Alexander. This particular caterpillar, actually, it's just a green caterpillar, but it got startled by us. And so it puffed up the front of its head. Its eyes are actually here. These are just spots that are meant to look like eyes, and it's meant to have a very scary face to scare us away. And it didn't work. I took a picture, but I didn't eat it. So anyway, this particular black swallowtail caterpillar, this is the same caterpillar. They have different instars or phases in their caterpillar life. So this is a newly hatched caterpillar. And this is how it looks shortly before it spins its chrysalis and becomes a butterfly. Okay, moths. Moths are older than butterflies, but similar. Similar needs. They need host plants, and they do come and get nectar like butterflies. There are about 12,000 species of moths in native species in North America. Most are active at night, so we don't see them. They're attracted to flowers that have scent in the evening. As I said, we don't see that many moths because they're not that active during the day most of the time. But you can tell them apart generally because they hold their wings out flat at rest. You see like this, like sort of like an airplane. And they have very furry antennae, furry bodies. You can see those antennae a little bit. But similar lifestyle to butterflies, they're dependent on host plants. Most of them pupate underground, which means they make their chrysalises underground. So caterpillars will drop from the trees to the ground, buried down in leaf mulch, and spin their cocoon. So we don't often see them in their cocoon form. So this is a polyphemus moth. It's actually not a pollinator. The adults have reduced mouth parts, excuse me. So they don't even eat when they're adults. They actually only live about a week as an adult. And their only purpose as an adult is to mate and lay eggs. And this one again, I actually took this picture at my cabin in Northwest New Jersey. This particular moth was on a hemlock tree. And you can see it also has these big eye spots. It's supposed to become somewhat scary. But this is a close-up of its head. You can see how hairy it is, but you can see the antennae really look like little ferns. They're just very unusual. And then butterflies have a straight antenna with a little knob on the top. So they do look different. But this moth is about 3 inches long. It's pretty big. And these are the host plants: birch, oak, willow, hickory, plum, cherry, maple, sassafras. Those are all trees and bushes that grow in our neighborhood, in our neck of the woods. So you should be able to find these once in a while. Not often, but they should be here. They have the host plants. And then this is my favorite moth, a hummingbird moth. And it's active during the day, one of the few moths that is active during the day. And it looks and acts like a hummingbird. It hovers above the flowers. It has a very long tongue. You can see it right here. This one was actually at a butterfly bush in the Waveney Walled Garden. The adults love phlox, bee balm, and butterfly bush. And these are the host plants. So honeysuckle, dogbane, cherry plum, hawthorn, arrowwood, viburnum, all plants that we find here. Okay, so as I said, butterflies and moths have a caterpillar phase. So if you want to have them adults in your garden, you need to let their caterpillars chew the leaves of your plants. It's counterintuitive to gardeners, but it's what you need to let happen. Okay, and most butterflies and moths, as bees and wasps, do not survive the winter. Butterflies and moths in particular, only a few. I think the monarchs we know migrate down to Mexico. We have mourning cloaks and commas who hibernate as adults, but the others do not. So each species of butterfly has its own period of development, and they have several flights or generations within a season. So you might have a swallowtail that emerges in May, and it goes through it lays eggs, and then those eggs go through their life cycle and emerge maybe as adults in August. And then the last generation of every kind of butterfly that does not spend the winter and as an adult goes into diapause, which is a kind of arrested development. And so some butterflies spend their winter as eggs, some as larvae, some as chrysalis. When spring comes, they complete their development and become adults. So my idea here, of course, is that all of these pollinators need a place to spend the winter. This is the pollinator meadow at Silvermine Fowler Land Trust property. We leave the plants standing all winter long. It's great for the birds, but it's especially good to let pollinators spend the winter where they are. So when spring comes, they can continue their development and become adults. Okay, beetles. I never knew beetles were pollinators. There are about 25,000 known types of beetles in North America. And I read recently, beetles are the most plentiful terrestrial species. If you were to line all of the terrestrial animals, that includes animals, birds, uh, reptiles, amphibians, insects, if you align them all up around the earth, every fourth one would be a beetle. It's pretty amazing. I really think beetles rule the world. Anyway, they have three important roles that they play. They are scavengers, decomposers of organic matter, the cleanup crew. They are voracious predators. They eat all kinds of other insects, and some are pollinators. Not all of them, just certain groups are pollinators. This one up here is a red collared, is it a red collared blister beetle? I think it's called. It's red-necked false blister beetle. It's a big name for a little tiny thing. It's about the size of a pencil lead. It's on little tiny things, and they're on a trout lily, and trout lilies are little tiny flowers. So I enlarged this. Then these two engaging here are longhorn beetles. And this is a soldier beetle. He's actually upside down. This is his antenna, also called a Pennsylvania leatherwing. So those are types of pollinating beetles. Beetles, in fact, are the oldest pollinators on Earth. As a species, they predate flowering plants. They were around when the first flowering plants came after the dinosaurs. Magnolias and water lilies are some of the oldest flowering plants on Earth, and the beetles are still their main pollinators. They visit flowers for pollen. They are chewers, so they are somewhat destructive. They're considered messy. They will chew through the flowers. They also defecate on the flowers, but they have their place. They do their thing, and they're pretty fascinating to watch. They're usually attracted to large, greenish white, heavily scented flowers, some that smell musty or putrid or spicy. And then come to flower flies. And here's another picture of a flower fly that you can tell it looks very much like a bee. They often mimic bees and wasps in appearance and buzzing behavior. It gives them some degree of protection from predators, even though they don't have stingers and they don't bite. Flower flies have two wings. They hold out like an airplane, like a moth. Butterflies have four wings, and they fold them across their back like this. So that's an easier way to see. Flower flies do not have any hair on their bodies. Bees are quite hairy. They collect pollen granules. Flower flies are not. They have big eyes and little antennae. Flower flies are the second most important pollinator after bees. Adults gather nectar from a wide variety of flowers, and they're beneficial to our agricultural crops. They lay their eggs on rotting logs. Some parasitize other insects. Their larvae feed on aphids, other insects, pests, fungi, decaying matter. So, they come for flowers, for nectar. They aren't pollen gatherers, but they are very effective. As I said, the second most important pollinator after bees. So these two look the most like bees. They're syrphid flies, hoverflies. This, I believe, is also a syrphid fly. It's unusual. It has these long diaphanous wings. And this is a tachnid fly, which is just big and greasy looking, but pretty cool as flies go. Okay, so I talked about the 6 main groups of pollinators. So how to create pollinator-friendly habitat. A lot of people say, oh, I've got to rip out everything and start over, which is really not what anybody has to do. I think the first thing you really need to do is to assess and appreciate what you already have, and start by adding a few native plants. And then the general rule of thumb is if you have 8 or more native plant species, you are enhancing the diversity of your pollinator habitat. This is two honeybees on a nodding onion. This is a plant we put in the pollinator meadow at Silvermine Fowler, very popular with bees. So assess what you have. If you live in this area, which most of you do, we have lots of tall canopy trees, lots of tall canopy native trees. They are excellent as caterpillar food. We have understory trees and shrubs. A lot of those that we have are invasive, like euonymus, barberry, but there are some really good native ones. And assess what kind of understory and native trees you have. Do you have a garden, and what do you have in it? Do you have a lawn? Do you have an excessive amount of lawn? Do you have native species? Do you have invasive plants? Well, we all have invasive plants. I know that's for sure. Just as an example, this is my woodland border garden. This is my back lawn, which is not very big. And I've let this whitewood aster colonize, about 20 feet of this border between my lawn and the woods. And it came on its own, and it spread, and it blooms in September, and bees, late season bees, love it. On the other side of this, I have my house and my west border, which is perennials, primarily perennials, and it goes from April through into November, and it's full of pollinators. This is wintergreen, which is a ground cover. It's a woodland ground cover. This is violets, which grow all over New Canaan. Are you using pesticides or herbicides or non-organic fertilizers? Do you have uncultivated areas with fallen logs, rocks, leaves, mulch, and ground covers? Can you convert some of your lawn to woodland edge or a meadow? This in particular is Silvermine Fowler Meadow, New Canaan Land Trust. It's a mixed meadow with 21 different kinds of plants. They're all jumbled together. It starts blooming in April, and it goes through, oh, thank you. And it goes through November. This is Blue Bunny Sedge. It's a ground cover that I bought at Copia last year, and I'm using it as an edge between my lawn and my shrubs here. And then this is another garden along the side of my south side of my house in early spring, where I've taken about 12 feet of lawn and turned it into a garden. So if you have read Doug Ptolemy's books, which I think probably a lot of you have, he's written his recent book, Nature's Best Hope, but also Bringing Nature Home. He talks about native trees, native canopy trees, in particular oaks, which are a tremendous support of wildlife, pollinators, birds, and other wildlife. But any of these trees, these big native trees here, are very good as caterpillar food and for places to nest, perhaps overwinter. Then we have our native understory trees and shrubs. I will say most tall canopy trees are wind pollinated. So their main, I guess, for pollinators, their main benefit would be as host plants for the caterpillars. Majority of native understory trees and shrubs that flower are pollinated by pollinators. Here we have Clethra, summer sweet, good wetland plant. This is our native Florida dogwood. This is sassafras. It's a male sassafras. They have showier flowers than the female version. This is Winterberry holly. It has a sort of nondescript little white flowers, but they become those gorgeous red berries in the winter. This is our state flower, Mount Laurel. And this tropical looking flower is Carolina allspice or sweet shrub. There's just a few of those. Okay. And then, so I'm going from the canopy to the understory. Now I am talking about plants, ground level. We have annuals, bulbs, and perennials. And for those of you who are gardeners, you already know all this, but I'm just going to go briefly. Annuals live one season. They're long blooming. They produce abundant flowers and abundant seeds. The mother plant dies at the end of the season. So the reason that they produce so many seeds is because they have to do that in order to ensure that the plant lives on, that the plant, not the mother, but the babies live on following year. So they are a good thing to add to your garden if you want to have something that's blooming all the time. This is zinnias, probably the best annual you could plant if you have sun. They attract all kinds of butterflies. They just love them, as do bees. This is Angelonia. I like this plant. I'm not sure it's the best pollinator plant. It may be over hybridized. Sometimes hybridized plants produce no pollen or nectar at all. But I like to plant it where there's holes in my garden left by the bulbs that have died back. This is an annual sage. There's annual and perennial sages, come in great colors. Hummingbirds like them. If you live in a condo, you can just put out a bowl of pansies in the spring. You'd be amazed at how many bees will visit for the nectar, the pollen. And then bulbs. Bulbs are usually very long-lived. They bloom early before the trees are out. They're important for the early pollinators like bumblebees, mason bees, who come out early. Generally, honeybees don't fly if the daytime temperature is below 55. So these are important for our early bees who do. They are ephemeral, which means the foliage goes dormant after flowering, and they store their energy in the bulb until next season. And then perennials are really the backbone of the garden. They're long-lived. They generally have a shorter bloom time than annuals. There are cool season perennials. There are early, mid, late spring, early, mid, late summer, and fall. They have different times when they bloom. This is, I said, short bloom season. They produce seeds and flowers and seeds, but they preserve a lot of their energy in their roots because they live year to year. So the foliage dies to the ground at frost, and the rootstock lives on. Usually, some perennials have a crown that will live all winter long. It'll stay green, but a lot of them just die to the ground. But the rootstock is still there. Okay, so the best pollinator habitats. You want to have diverse plantings with different shaped flowers and different bloom times. Bees and butterflies have somewhat long tongues. Flower flies and beetles don't. So they're not going to be reaching down into a cone-shaped flower. This is a tiger swallowtail. It's interesting that the body is striped just like the wings. That's coneflower, and this is some kind of a borer moth that's visiting goldenrod. This is a golden digger wasp on a rattlesnake master, and this is a green sweat bee on a butterfly weed, and a bumblebee in the Penstemon digitalis. So you can see they're going to different shaped flowers. This one, bumblebees can buzz and go all the way up into a funnel shaped flower. Other smaller bees like these will not do that. So you need to have all different shaped flowers and bloom times. There's an example of a bumblebee tried to get into this one blossom that is not open yet and could not get in there. So eventually gave up, and he went over to the other one that found that it was open. And I'm sorry, I moved my camera a little bit. You can see the pollen he's collecting. He's got little yellow dust, pieces of dust all over him. See how hairy the body is, and just having a great time. Okay, so early spring, non-natives can give your early spring habitat a boost. Don't kill me for saying that, but This is my front hill. I have hellebores and I have daffodils. They both bloom early April. The bees are out and loving it. They're easy to grow. They colonize readily and they do not attract deer. So I have that on my front hill. In my woodland areas, I have found these wildflowers. These are spring beauties. They grow all over New Canaan. They're all over the meadows at Waveney, down by Lapham Road. This is bloodroot, trout lily, also all over New Canaan. It's a very tiny little flower, and it closes up when it's dark outside. If it's a dark day, the flowers won't open, but the sun is out bright. They have these tiny little flowers. And this one is cranesville geranium. This is, again, violets all over the place. And if you're lucky, you'll find trillium. The deer do like those, so they're not around much. Again, trout lily will grow in undisturbed leaf mulch. This is what the flowers look like when they're not open. So it's very often you won't even notice the flowers. But on a sunny day, they'll do this and they will look amazing. This is Camasia. This is a hybridized version of wild hyacinth that we planted at Silvermine Fowler Meadow. Blooms in May, attracts bumblebees and hummingbirds. This is wild cranesville at the Hannon Field. This is the same meadow I showed in the beginning that had the black-eyed Susans. This is how it looks in the spring when the spring flowers are in bloom. It's absolutely gorgeous. Here are some other plants that you can go and buy for your garden. Woodland phlox, Virginia bluebells, foam flower, excuse me, native columbine, iris reticulata, and ever-blooming bleeding heart. And then this is a sample of a woodland edge garden that I have in the spring. So instead of grass, I have these plants that are kind of colonizing and taking over. Here are some summer flowers. Purple coneflower. You see this bee has pollen sacs on its legs. This is great blue lobelia, aster, woodland sunflower, simicifuga, and a sedum. And you see this interesting bug, which is actually a pollinating mosquito. It's called an elephant mosquito. It was about an inch long, and it's a vegetarian. It doesn't bite people. It pollinates, and was just very cool. And I've never seen one before, and I'll probably never see it again. But it was just there when I was looking, and there it was. So if you plant anything in the mint family, mountain mint is a fabulous plant. Bee balm, all kinds of bee balm. Agastache, which is also called anisacic. You can also, if you just plant regular old-fashioned garden mint or lemon balm, oregano, they all attract small pollinators, little flower flies, little bees, willow moths. Joe Pye weed, if you have room, this is like taking over my side garden. It is quite big and blousy, but if you go out and stand next to it when it's in bloom, and it's just full of pollinators and predators and other bugs. It's amazingly alive. And then coneflowers, when the coneflowers bloom in my garden, the swallowtails show up. There's a tiger and a blue swallowtail, but these other creatures too. Here's a sulfur, longhorn beetle, a digger bee, and a flower fly. So what you want to do is to create a habitat with an emphasis on native plants. You want to make sure you have canopy, understory, ground level, healthy organic soil. You want places for pollinators to nest and shelter. You want places for them to overwinter. You need to provide food for the adults and the developmental stages. And you need to have fun in observing what's going on. So this is what I call my garden in between the south side of my house. It's between 6 and 12 feet deep or so. This is late summer, it's just full of all different kinds of flowers. And you take a closer look and you will find all of these pollinators busy doing what they're doing, their pollinator life. So what I really suggest is for everybody, if you're really interested in pollinators, is to go out every day and look for them, because they're all around us and they're busy doing their thing. And if we help by creating more friendly habitats for them, they will really thrive. And if you're lucky, you may find one of these. I'll show you this little film. Is a hummingbird moth in my phlox. And I was standing about 3 feet away, and he did not care at all. He just wanted to feast on the nectar here. It's really cool thing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I forgot to mention at the beginning, but there's still time. If folks have questions, please include that in the question and answer feature, and we'll read those off to Susan so she can provide us answers. I'll get us started here. We've got a couple. The first one is very timely here, and that is asking, when do you clean up the plants you have left over from winter during your sort of spring cleanup?
Yeah. Well, I have just gone out and done that. And then, of course, I read from the Stanford Pollinator Pathway, it was too soon. So the problem I think a lot of people have is that when the new plants are coming up, especially the bulbs are coming up to bloom, you don't want all the old stuff lying around. So, I'd say like early April. It depends on the weather. If it's been really, really chilly, which it has been here, it might be a little too soon. But in general, I think, about April 1st is when I would say to do it. I did a little early because I have to go someplace. So I was wanting to get things neat, but yeah.
Great.
Answer your question?
I think so. And then the next question is more about meadow management at the Land Trust specifically, asking about the timing of when we mow our different pollinator meadows.
Okay, well, in general, we only mow our meadows once a year, and we wait until a hard freeze. The last few years, it's been early January. It depends on when also the ground is really frozen. A lot of our meadows are quite wet, so we don't want to mow when the ground is defrosted. We don't like to mow too early in the fall. The insect life has not completely gone to bed, but also we have all the migrating birds coming through. So we generally will do it early January or February. The pollinator meadow at Silvermine Fowler, we don't mow with a tractor. We do that with a weed whacker, and we've just done that the last week. So again, probably maybe should have waited a few weeks, but it happens when you get to it. So we just did it, and we leave all of the old plants in place. So if there's still insect life in them, we haven't really destroyed it.
I was going to say that seems to be a difference between sort of the way the Land Trust manages our meadows. Everything's mowed but left in place, whereas folks who would be doing their spring cleaning may have the tendency to bag it and trash it. Which
exactly, yeah. And actually, at my house, we don't bag it; we put it in the woods, so it's still there. I mean, hopefully, there's still some life going on in there. But yeah, we generally leave it all. It's like mowing your lawn and not and leaving the hatch down.
Perfect. Another question here, maybe more specific to your garden, but how much maintenance does a garden like this require? And maybe sort of it depends on complexity, I'm sure, but just to get
Yeah,
everyone
I
started.
mean, it depends. My gardens are kind of established. So once you have perennial gardens established, you don't really need to water them. I rarely water my garden. And to be honest, I don't really fertilize it either. Um, but it just depends on what you like. I like to go out and fuss around. And generally, I kind of let things go to seed and grow where they want to grow. And that makes it less hard to take care of them because they're not going to be as fussy about where they are. But yeah, it takes some time, and we don't have a gardener. We do it all ourselves. So, and we have, a 2-acre property, and we don't have that much lawn, but we have a garden completely surrounding my house and completely surrounding the lawn on the edge of the woods. So, and it's hard to say time-wise. I mean, I like to do it. So, and by being out in the garden every day, I get to see what's going on. But you can start small and just have like a 6 by 8 foot little plot with 5 or 6 different perennials and maybe some bulbs and annuals, and then it's not it's not overwhelming. You don't have to have a whole like border all around.
Mhm.
I think that's a lot of people think they have to have a major expansion, and you don't. You can even just do some pots of annuals
Mhm.
if you don't want to spend the time or the money.
Perfect. You touched on one example of this during your presentation, but in terms of using, the question is, as long as they're not invasive species, is there disadvantages to using non-natives like autumn joy sedum or nepeta? Maybe just speaking to some of the benefits that those non-native, but making sure that they're not
Well,
invasive plants could provide.
yeah, I mean, we have a ton of non-native plants in our habitat, including most of the foods that we eat are not native here. So I think in general, I mean, pollinators will go to any flower to get pollen or nectar, but the native plant part is really important for the butterflies and the moths in particular. And as long as you have, some of the host plants for them, I think it's fine to have non-native plants, that you like. I mean, I like autumn sedum. I love hellebores. I like flowering bulbs. That none of flowering bulbs are all from Eurasia originally. Hellebores are from China, but I do like them. I mean, I think you can compromise a little bit and have some of both. I just think if you were adding plants at this point, that you would maybe look to native plants.
Perfect. So these are two sort of more specific questions about actually kind of making something like this happen. The first is pollinator gardens in the woods where it's shady. How practical is that? And if you have any sort of plant suggestions for the folks who asked this question, sure, that'd be
Um,
appreciated.
yeah, well, I have traveling sun in my garden. Um, the whitewood aster that I showed grows in shade. Um, there's a fair number of things. A lot of the early spring flowers like columbines and wood phlox, woodland phlox, they will grow before the sun, before the leaves leaf out. So they will get their sun and be shaded the rest of the year, and they're fine with that. There's something called the woodland sunflower. Yeah, I think a lot of the plants at the Fowler Meadow are not real full sun perennials.
Mhm.
Like I have coneflower, my coneflowers take part sun, and Joe Pye weed takes part sun. There's things you can plant that go in the shade. Um, I'm trying to think of something else. Simicifuga, which I grow, is a shade plant. It's tall, white spires on it. A lot of shrubs grow in the shade. Uh, So
Yeah,
I
that
don't
last point, I was going to say things like viburnums and dogwoods
viburnum,
are shady trees and
dogwood,
shrubs that are
plethora,
mhm,
the spice bush. I have a lot of spice bush on my property. None of it is, it's all wild. So I don't have any cultivars. The cultivars tend to have much showy flowers on them. If you drive around town, you see a spice bush that's totally in bloom. It's probably not, it's probably been cultivated, but um, there's lots of things that just, they do grow. I mean, you just have to look them up and see. Things like, I mean, bloodroot, well, bloodroot's hard to grow, but I mean, it's growing in my woods. The trout lily is growing all over my woods. It's growing on its own. I didn't plant it there. Spring beauty grows in the woods. There's just a lot of things. It just, sometimes I think if you just have an area that's with a lot of leaf mulch, things will pop up that
mhm.
you didn't know were there.
Perfect. And then in terms of the other sort of plant selection question, this person's looking for recommendation for maybe some shorter in stature plants. They say that many native pollinators. Wait, yeah. Can you suggest some native pollinators that don't grow very tall and could go in the front of a garden? Many of them seem to grow several feet high.
Yeah, they do. Let's see, the short ones. Well, woodland phlox is only about a foot tall. That blooms in the spring and then it kind of dies away. The Tiarella, which is a clumpy kind of plant, is only about a foot tall. This is really short. I have over here. I'm trying to think of you. I'm drawing a blank now. The ever blooming bleeding heart, which is technically not a native plant. There's a native one that comes from the Pacific Northwest. The other ones are from Asia, but it's only about 2 feet tall, and it produces flowers all summer. There's Jacob's ladder, which is also a rather short plant. Blooms in the spring. Well, black-eyed Susans aren't, I mean, if you want 2 feet tall, black-eyed Susans aren't that tall. Yeah, I can't really
Okay.
think of anything else right now, sorry.
Somebody wrote in the comments wild ginger. Maybe that's another.
Yes, ginger,
Okay.
although it doesn't flower, I don't think, but um, yeah, that's
Okay.
like a ground cover.
Mhm.
Well, I planted the blue bunny sedge that I planted is for part shade and it looks like clumps of grass, but it's a sedge. And it does put up little flowers in the spring at some point. It hasn't flowered yet at my house, but I think it attracts little butterflies. And that's, a good ground cover.
Maybe one or two more here. This is sort of the flip side instead of thinking about planting, but I'm curious about how to get rid of invasive species while sort of limiting environmental impact. Do you have any suggestions there?
It's very hard. I mean, when we moved in, the whole front hill was garlic mustard, and we came from California. I had no idea what it was. I thought it was very pretty in May. It's like a sea of white blossoms. We just went out and pulled it out. I mean, relentlessly. I mean, we've been here 23 years now. I go out every day. I go out and I see like 3 or 4. I mean, that's all that's left, but still, it's a lot of work. I mean, and we did the same. My husband pulled out all the Japanese barberry. We still have the euonymus. But, unfortunately, deer don't eat euonymus. I probably all know what wing euonymus looks like, but it's like the understory plant in New Canaan, and it gets red berries. The birds eat it. They spread it everywhere, and it's not eaten by the deer. So it's the main thing that grows. So we have some very big ones, but we are pulling out the suckers. But it's manual labor. I mean, we don't treat it with anything. And poison ivy I pull out, although that's technically not a bad plant, but if you're allergic to it, you don't want it. And I'm not allergic to it, so I get to pull it out. But it's hard. I mean, because people don't want to spray. I don't spray with anything. And, there's just always something coming. I mean, something is always going to colonize and try and take over. And that's the thing about nature is like, even if you have a garden, it's never the same every year. Every year is slightly different. Some plants grow more than others. Other plants die. Something else comes. Something eats something. It's just a fluid thing. So you just have to kind of go with the flow a little bit. And that's how, I mean, that's the kind of gardener I've become. I'm not very fussy about what's going on. And I don't worry about mildew and anything on my plants. If it comes, it comes. I mean, I'm just very like laid back about it, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's an important thing to remember is that we sort of want to control nature sometimes, but
Exactly. And it's that way with the pollinator meadow at Silvermine Fowler. It's a mixed meadow. So everything is growing into everything else. And at certain times it looks pretty messy, but that's the way it is. And our other meadows, that we haven't planted really, I mean, they have a mixture of stuff and it's like a free-for-all. So you try to manage it a little bit so that things don't get out of hand, but I have it's a weed, but it's also a good pollinator plant. It's the one that causes milk sickness. The name is escaping me. It's similar to Joe Pye weed, but it's white. And it has hundreds of little white flowers. In late summer, it blooms and it goes everywhere. And I encouraged it a little bit, and now I have it everywhere. So I'm a little sad about it. But I keep pulling it out. It's like in other things like bee balm. I love bee balm. It will take over too. Joe Pye weed and goldenrod is a fabulous pollinator plant, but it needs a lot of space and it takes over. Yeah, so.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the other thing to remember for folks at home too is that, I mean, meadows are in a way not a natural thing, at least in this
Oh.
area. I mean, they're the many of the big meadow habitats that exist across New England are the result of or were the result of fires and things like those sort of natural disturbances that have
Right.
come and clear things
Yeah,
out.
they aren't natural here really. And because there's succession, and if you don't mow a meadow, it becomes a forest, as we've noticed all over Connecticut and New England. Um, so yeah, I mean, we're always trying to manage the plants that grow around us, whether they're native or not. And as I said, I mean, most of the foods we eat are not native. The animals we eat aren't native either. They're all brought here from Europe. So, we I
Well,
don't
maybe that's a good point to end, is that there's we can do what we can on our properties and in our land trust properties and on our pollinator pathway. And it's just part of a bigger system that operates on a larger scale and on different timelines. And while we're here, we do our part.
Right. I mean, it's you can do just a little and it'll be helpful. It's like I said, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just, plant 8 plants and see what happens. And if you're really interested in watching what happens, then you might like get the bug and say, okay, I'm going to do more. One thing I know, my friend Robin Bates Mason said she always encourages people to plant bee balm because it attracts hummingbirds. And as soon as you get a hummingbird in your garden, you're hooked. So, I mean, it's a great plant to have, even though, it does they don't all get big and blousy. There are smaller ones, but, once you get a hummingbird coming to your plants or some really pretty butterflies, it makes it worthwhile.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Susan. Just going to make
Yeah.
one more quick plug for the upcoming Earth Day extravaganza that our Pollinator Pathways partners are hosting. I'm putting that in the chat right now. And then we also just got a message from the folks at Elm Street Books, I guess, are doing a window display on bees, pollinators, and native plants after
Cool.
Easter.
Okay.
So sounds like they'll have some recommended books and reading there for folks who want to learn more. So
Oh,
plenty of opportunity. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I do have a couple books I wanted to show.
Oh, great.
Is this backwards?
No, you're fine. It might be helpful if
It's
you
backwards to
stop
me.
sharing
Okay.
your screen so that we can see you in full size though.
Okay. How do I do that?
Um,
Well,
I don't have your
anyway,
screen.
it's Connecticut Butterfly Atlas. It's put out by Connecticut DEEP. It's a great book. Talks about all the butterflies in Connecticut. And all about their host plants, the egg, their life cycles, the eggs, the host plants, and everything. This is a fabulous book too. Pollinators of Native Plants. Love it. And then this is Doug Ptolemy book that I love. It's called The Living Landscape. He wrote it with Richard Dark, who did all the photography. They're great books. Anyway, sorry, I can't really show them to you. So
No, it's great.
okay.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Susan, and thanks
Okay,
everybody
thank
for
you.
joining us this evening.
All right, thank you. Bye.